What do you see as the rites of passage in Australia for Australian men?
Well, we don't really have that many rites of passage anymore. We used to have rites of passage. The sad part is that, you know, in Australia, when you think about contemporary rituals, what does it come down to? You know, your first bog lap in your mum's Corolla, your first drink, your first root.
First burnout.
Yeah.
First fridge knocked over.
Yeah, it's thin, isn't it? It's sad, and I think we leave our boys to make themselves up as they go along, and defending for themselves in a way, because we're not sure about the ways in which to guide them.
How would you create a rites of passage for young Australian men?
Good question. As I said, I'm not an expert. I don't have the answers. It's just something I've been thinking about while I'm waiting for the next wave. More guidance. They also probably need limits. The one thing you do notice in traditional societies about rites of passage, it's about boundaries. You can do this, you can't do that. You can do that later. When you're a man, you can do that. But when you're a man, you also have to do this, and that's not negotiable. You have responsibilities. I don't know, maybe it's just that for the last couple of generations, the parents have been children. The parents have been anxious about being parents. And somewhere after 1965, it was almost as though the grown-ups were embarrassed about being grown-up. Nobody wanted to be the uncool parent that said no. And we got stuck in a kind of drift.
You're talking about our generation? And the one just after us?
Yeah, I think so.
Who gave you the example of being a good man?
I think I had some pretty good models when I was a boy. My father was outwardly, a pretty masculine sort of a guy. He was a bloke. There's no getting around that.
He's a country copper.
Yeah, he was a copper. But he wasn't your cliche copper. He wasn't what people expected. Certainly not what my friends expected when they got home from school. You know, if they dropped over to my place, we'd slip into the back door and come through the kitchen, and I could feel my mate. This happened several times. I could feel my mate sort of stopping behind me, and I'd look behind and try and figure out what it was. And they'd always be staring at my father, who would be in his tunic. Well, he'd have his tunic off, but he'd have his police strides and police boots on. He'd have the handcuffs and the truncheon hanging off the end of the ironing board, and he'd be in his singlet and he'd be ironing. And he'd be in front of daytime TV before his shift, just helping Mum knocking out the shirts and the school uniforms. And that was for me. I just thought everyone's dad did the ironing and did the washing up. I didn't realise that my dad was different until I went into other people's houses, and then realised that he was different.
And what was there?
Well, the opposite, obviously. But worse than that, you go into people's houses and you just feel menace. And it would always be a bloke, and he'd be sitting in his TV chair with his beer and his fags and his feet up, giving orders or not saying a word. It was more frightening when they didn't speak, because there was something going on there that I was only ever frightened of other men. But it was a useful lesson to me, to realise that there were men worth being afraid of.
How have you spoken to your own sons about being a man?
Probably obliquely, like a bloke does. I think that good men are often raised by good men, but I think they were often raised and modelled by good women and strong women as well. My father had a very strong mother, and my brothers and my sister and I had a very strong mother, and I think we learnt as much how to be men from our mother as we did from our father. And I think my boys and my daughter have learnt, I'm sure, more about being a good person and a good man from their mother. But to get back to your question, I think taking your own boys and other boys seriously, noticing that they're there, know that they are wide open beings. They're looking, they're soaking everything up. The things that you say and do are accountable, and you should be held accountable for them because they're noticed. It's about noticing and realising that you're being noticed in return, and there's a dance there, a dance of responsibility
and awareness. You've got to be aware of what you're doing.
Yeah, and some of that awareness is being aware of your own privilege as a male. There's a huge amount of unexamined privilege that men go about in the world thinking that they've got where they've got just because they're good. And a lot of the time they've got where they've got mostly because they're a bloke. They have an enormous tailwind. And if you're not actually conscious of that, then you don't understand that for so many people, particularly girls and young women, they have a headwind. There's changing, but it's still there. And a bloke who can't see that is a bloke who's just adding to the problem. He's adding to the headwind.
Do you reckon this is a conversation Australia wants to have?
I've spoken to thousands of people in the last few weeks, and I was really heartened and curious about the kinds of people who were coming along and wanted to talk, and people who've been responding. Yes, I think so. I don't think everyone wants to. But then that's just the nature of politics. The people in power don't want to give power up. But there are people who can see the point of giving some power up. And life is only improved, whether that's changing rights about racial discrimination, rights about voting. We only make progress when we're enlightened enough to give something up. Every good thing in this culture that we've done, we can see the benefits. We hold on to them. When we do something right, we own it. And I think, there's hope that we can do that.
Thank you for being a good man, Tim Winton.